Welcome into another edition of Bama Central 3 and Out with Joey Blackwell and Tony Sukalis. I'm Katie Wyndham. And Joey, you're with the baseball team all season long. Tony, you were in Hoover last week covering the SEC tournament. We saw Alabama baseball make a little bit of a surge towards the end of the year, but it still wasn't enough to get into the NCAA tournament. As the selection committee revealed the bracket on Monday, not only was Alabama not in the field, they weren't in the first four out either. So, Joey, what are your thoughts on the situation? And do you think, after following this team, after seeing what they did at the end of the season, after seeing the field, that this is a team that deserved to be in the NCAA tournament?
Well, I'll start with the team that everybody's comparing this Alabama team to, and that's Ole Miss. Ole Miss was able to get in. They were part of the last four in teams. And when you compare the ends of the seasons, Alabama simply had a better run. Alabama, of course, hosted number 5 Arkansas, bested them 2-1. Then, of course, they beat Georgia in the opening round, beat Arkansas again the third time in roughly a week. And then, of course, they had those 2 losses to end the tournament. Meanwhile, Ole Miss lost 2 games out of 3 to Texas A&M. Then were ousted from the SEC tournament in the first round. You also compare, their RPI and the strength of schedule. Ole Miss did have, excuse me, Ole Miss did have, they were 37th in RPI compared to Alabama's 43, but Alabama had the 4th toughest strength of schedule in the country. They were all compared to Ole Miss at 12. So there's really just a lot of comparisons. Ole Miss had one more win on the year than Alabama did. And when you really break down the end, I know the committee likes to say they don't like to put a lot of emphasis on the conference tournaments other than, considering the automatic qualifiers, obviously. But really, I think more emphasis should be placed on there because Alabama at the end of the year did look like a really solid team. And let's not forget, Alabama also swept this Ole Miss team on the road, a very important point to bring up. So overall, it's obviously disappointing for Alabama fans. It's disappointing for the team. I know it's disappointing for head coach Brad Bohannon. They made it last year. This year they really repeated kind of the same process. They won the first 2 games in Hoover, then lost the second 2. And if you're really using last year as a track record, this team was much better. They played a lot closer games. They really should have been in. It was even more deserving than they were last year.
Yeah, I tend to agree when comparing them to Ole Miss, and so that's a tough pill to swallow. As you mentioned, they were swept. Or they swept Ole Miss, at Ole Miss. So I mean, that's tough if you're from an Alabama perspective. But talking to people heading into Hoover, there was a thought that they had to win 3 games, and they came close to doing that, but they didn't do that. So I think that you can talk about whether they deserve to win or deserve to be in over Ole Miss. It's kind of like they had a cut and dry system. I think had they, finished off that game against Texas A&M, I think they're in. I think there's no question about it. They're in, and they had that game in the bag. And I think when you look at it from an Alabama perspective, when you're looking back at this season, there's so many what if moments. There's a ton of 1-run games. There's a ton of midweek games where you're just better than the opponent and you couldn't get it done. And so, I mean, 2 or 3 of those go the other way, Alabama's in no problem, maybe even just one of those, depending on the 1-run games, if you were to pick which one, I think you could definitely have Alabama in as well. So it's like I said, a tough pill to swallow for Alabama, but I think it is what it is because they needed that 3rd win and they just couldn't get it.
Yeah. And I think in a video a couple of weeks ago when Alabama was kind of on a skid, we talked about that those midweek games could come back to bite them. And I think ultimately that's one of the main things that hurt them, because if you take a few more games away in the loss column, add into the win column, that also kind of hurts your RPI a little bit, losing some of those more bottom tier teams. And so, Alabama's kept out of the NCAA tournament this year. And that puts a bow on the team sports for the Crimson Tide, a pretty disappointing year overall after the success that the Alabama Athletic Department had in 2020 through 2021. But like we learned on Monday, Alabama baseball will not be part of the NCAA tournament this year. And that'll about do it for this edition of Famous Central 3 and Out. For Joey Blackwell and Tony Sukalis, I'm Katie Wyndham. Thanks for watching.